Welcome everyone. In this video I will be going over item level in PvP and explaining the differences between pet builds and petless builds. Item level in a nutshell increases your maximum hit points and your raw damage significantly. But there is a catch. The higher your item level is, the harder it is to cap your stats. This is because the goalpost you need to hit in order to cap the rating side of any stat is always the same number as your item level. So if you had 60k item level as an example, your stat ratings would also need to be stacked to 60k each in order to cap them. Obviously that is a lot of stats. As another example, if you only had 29k item level, you'd only need to stack your stat ratings to 29k each in order to cap them. 29k is much easier to reach or get close to even if you aren't trying to stack anything. So all your stats at low item level tend to be higher than they are when you have a really high item level. To recap, a high item level build has a lot more HP and raw damage at the cost of making it much harder to cap their stat ratings. A low item level build has a lot less HP and raw damage, but they have a much easier time holding on to high stats and are usually way cheaper to make than a high item level build is. High item level builds, low item level builds, and many shades of in between are all usable in PvP. So you may be wondering which is better, high item level or low item level. Having high offense stats combined with a somewhat high item level tends to result in a much smoother and more reliable damage than just blindly cranking up your item level to the moon. You need some of both, but exactly how much you need varies somewhat by class and other variables. Note that this could change later as the maximum obtainable item level in this game continues to increase. We could eventually see a day when max item level becomes stronger than a well-rounded setup is. Similarly, your defensive stats are also higher across the board on low item level builds than on high item level builds, but you can still end up too fragile if you are all defensive stats and no HP. The same is true of being all HP and no defensive stats. Again, you want to balance out your stats and item level in most cases instead of only building for one or the other. You want as close to having the best of both worlds as you can get. The best high item level builds do at least 10% more damage than the best low item level builds do. The best high item level builds also tend to have a higher effective HP than the best low item level builds do. Note that effective HP is calculated from a combination of your defenses, that's not just your HP. Put simply, this means that high item level builds are indeed better than low item level builds are in most cases, for both offensive and defensive considerations. But determining exactly how much item level is worth it for you and making sure you hold on to enough stats is the tricky part. After all, I'm sure many of you have seen 60k item level players in PvP that were surprisingly weak. The issue here is just being 60k item level isn't enough to be strong. You need to actually optimize your build for PvP. You may also have seen some really good rangers deliberately build for a lower item level, such as 46k. This was done to lower their HP enough to help them build up ribcage stacks. These stacks from this armor piece. Let me pull this down so you can see it. There you go, now you can see it. So, some rangers build specifically around this item, and you need a lower HP in some cases in order to proc that really well off of things like at-wills, if I remember right. Now, rangers in, like, this, ranger build was a solo queue specific adaptation. It probably wouldn't be as good in like tournaments or hardcore pre-mades if we still had those. But that 46k build that is built around ribcage stacks, that does work for solo queue. It's really good in there because you want all the damage. Now, Rangers and Bards under normal circumstances are both very demanding classes when it comes to item level. They need higher item level than some of the other classes do. Fighter and Wizard are kind of the opposite and tend to remain strong at much lower item levels, though they can still benefit from having a high item level. My Rogue runs 46k item level right now. But this is mostly to save money in my case. Probably I should build for 49k item level instead. Or higher if I was really trying to max out. 49k, I remember calculating that out, and I could definitely keep my stats stable at 49k if I switched a ring. But any higher than that is kind of up in the air right now, whether or not I could balance that correctly. Now, as another important thing to mention, all players that are below 40k item level are automatically scaled up to 40k item level while on a queued for PvP map. Because of this scaling, 29k is the minimum amount of item level you need in order to be useful in PvP on DPS classes. Any DPS class that is below 29k in PvP is too weak to PvP, and it will be really difficult to manually matchmake that for whoever the queue leader is. If we're assuming private matches here. Unless we get lucky and happen to have another player in the queue group at a very similar item level to you, you're going to be really hard to matchmake if you're below 29k. So you want to make sure you're 29k or higher in PvP if you want a good experience. As a heads up, 29k item level is enough to be useful, but it is still no match for a well-built, really high item level player in most cases. You'd still die a lot at this item level. Now, Rogue, I'd recommend being 38k item level minimum. 29k is probably too low for this class, to be honest. Healers on Cleric and Paladin can be a little bit lower than 29k and still be able to hold their own, even if they are built smart and being played by an experienced player. I've even seen an 18k Paladin healer do okay before. Notably, Wizard and Fighter are both able to build unusually strong builds at really low item levels. Fighters, for example, can be built at 29k, and they can go toe-to-toe with nearly maxed out players. Low item level builds... low item level builds do typically require some fancy toys such as Journal 3-set bonus, a high mount bolster, and good mount powers in order to work well. These builds often remove some or all of their stat enchantments as well and just leave those slots blank. That's to take advantage of the scaling in PvP, if I remember correct. Not all item level sources are created equal in PvP. Any source of item level that doesn't come with any stats that work in PvP is what I call an empty item level source. Some examples of empty item level sources are all sources of companion item level and the mount collar that increases your astral diamond gain. You'll get item level, sure, but these sources will also lower your stats by a significant amount. This is because you are bloating your item level up higher without adding any stats to go with it. However, empty item level can still be worth having in some cases. The item level sources you'd pretty much always want to have are the ones that come with a lot of stats attached to them. A great example are mythic insignias. They give you enough stats to balance out the massive item level increase they give you. Most companion item level sources do work in PvP. Yes, even on the maps you have to queue for. But the stats and other effects provided by companions don't work in PvP. If you look on the screen, I've provided a text block that tells you exactly which companion stuff does and doesn't work in PvP. Companion item level and other empty item level sources are currently useful, but they're starting to become less and less worth it over time. Petless builds could become best in slot in the future. People probably will have more and more incentive to take off 2 out of their 5 mount collars as well. I already do this, like I can show you. You can see I've only got 3 collars on. The other 2 just were kind of empty item levels, so I went ahead and took them off. I mean, it's still going to give you a damage bonus, but again, it's going to mess with your stats, and in my case, I couldn't afford it. To conclude this video, item level in PvP is fucking complicated, but in most cases, a very high but not quite max item level build that does use the companion stuff will outperform a completely petless build. Both petless builds and pet builds are viable builds in PvP. Partial pet builds, aka builds that only use some companion item level but not all of it, are also viable in PvP. And it's more important for your build to be built specifically for PvP than it is for it to simply be really high item level. That's everything important, guys. See you next time.